Hello friends, in the series which we are doing on understanding popular culture, today we'll talk about music. In the earlier lecture on music, we talked about the traditions which are concerned with music during the ancient as well as the medieval period, and we, in the context of the popular culture, as we know that music is one of the most important components of the popular culture, and not only the vocal music but a number of musical instruments, they are also part of the musical traditions. So continuing from that perspective, we find that not only music in the North India but also in the South India, it became very popular, and the Carnatic music which became quite popular in South India, along with the various kinds of instruments which have been used. All of this will be discussed today, as well as apart from that we'll also talk about in the context of the developments during the colonial period. In the context of the references or bibliography, one can refer to Professor T.K.V. Subramanian's chapter in the source material of a School of Open Learning Cultures in Indian Subcontinent. T.V. Kuppuswamy, Carnatic Music and the Tamils is another source material which one can refer apart from the one which has been mentioned. Then S. Ranga Ramanuj Iyengar, History of South Indian Carnatic Music, and P. Sambamurthy, South Indian Music. All these references can be taken when one is talking about these kinds of traditions which are concerned with music. And as I told you that in the earlier lectures on music, we talked about the period from the ancient as well as the medieval period, and today we'll try to talk about the kind of changes which happened during the colonial rule. And we see that when the British, they came to India, and how over a period of time the kind of political dominance which they created in India, because of which how the local rulers, they were largely they were not able to pay some kind of a patronage to the people, those who were working in their courts in terms of various cultural practices. For example, even the people, those who were concerned with music, and these people, they were getting patronage from the courts of the local rulers, but with the arrival of the British, we find that such kind of patronage dipped, and how a number of communities of performers they were being deprived of the elite patronage which they were getting earlier. And we find that when British, where they were there in India, they were not showing much interest in the native performing arts, and many times we find that how women in the performing arts, they were being treated as common prostitutes. And we also see this kind of treatment also was reflective of their low status in that sense, which was created in the later times. We also see that how the new educated class also began to treat them with scorn as well, and what we find that some kind of orthodoxy prevailed in a way where any kind of performances, they were being viewed through the mirrors of sexual morality, to an extent that the reputed courtesans, they stopped dancing. So such kind of attitudes in the society were not in a way good from the point of view of the development of such kind of musical traditions. And when these kinds of things, they were happening in the society, then they were also losing their coveted places as well as the patronage which was being given to them. And then we find that the new class of patrons, they also emerged from the lower sections of the society, and they began to extend their patronage to these arts and the people, those who were associated with these art in terms of practitioners. And we find that this in a way resulted in the survival of some of the traditions, though in a muted form. And when we talk about the musical traditions, we find that how the vocal music, however, was not deprived completely of the elite patronage, though it remained confined to the court of Indian princes. And in the absence of their genuine appreciation and the noble patronage, it could have almost become extinct. So we find that this kind of extinction which could have taken place was in a way stopped because of the kind of patronage which was being provided to them. And we also see that some of the British scholars, they were all were also very instrumental in the context of the Indian musicology, and the Western scholars how in a way went into some kind of a detailed study of the Indian music, where they tried to explain the various musical terms which were there in the professional parlance. And we also see that they were also dealing with the kind of developments which are happening in the context of the traditions and the trends of the Indian music from 18th to 20th centuries, and how some of the foreign scholars, they also wrote about the historical and the theoretical aspects of the Indian music, which had great impact on these authors who were conversant only with the English language. So their writings in a way created some kind of an interest in the Indian music, and many old treatises, they were also translated into English and other kinds of languages as well. And we also see that during this point of time when British they were there, they also established Asiatic Society of Bengal in 1784, and how it was when we talk about William Jones, who was a great scholar, and he was acquainted with the theory of music, and his essay Musical Modes of Hindus, which was published in 1793, is one of the earliest and significant contributions by an English writer to the study of Indian music. There were others apart from them also. One was Mr. Clements, who was one of those who opened new avenues of the critical and comparative standards from viewpoint of the Westerners. And we also find others like an Avillard, who was in the service of the Nawab of Banda, and he was the first to incorporate Hindi and Urdu songs illustrating certain types of musical compositions along with their notations. And he also tried to provide a glossary of some of the important Indian musical terms as well. So we find that how some of the Indian musical scholars, they also in a way contributed, and in that sense how they took up the study of the Indian music in that sense was also very instrumental in terms of carrying forward the studies of Indian music. And when you talk about scholars like S.M. Tagore, who was well known for his patronage to music, and during the period of 1867 to 1896 he published a number of books on music, and among them the Universal History of Music and Hindu Music from various authors require particular mention as well. Then we also find that some of the publications of great songbooks such as Sursagar and those of Pushti Marg about this time, they also in a way revived the interest of the educated class in the old compositions as well. So we find that the publishing industry in that sense, and the publication of books where books they were being published, they also generated a lot of interest within the Indians, those who were interested in the study of music. And when you talk about by some of the scholars like Pandit Vishnu Digambar, who was a disciple of Pandit Bal Krishna Bhuva, and who was a great music scholar and a brilliant musician of the Gwalior Gharana. And we find that he was responsible from rescuing music from the clutches of vulgar caterers and popularized it amongst the educated class. And he also prepared a way for theories of Pandit Balkhand and many others as well. And we also find that these scholars like Pandit Balkhand, they established the current Hindustani music system on a sound foundation, and his Hindustani Sangeet Paddhati describes the theory of music. In it he has tried to trace the historical growth and transitions in the form of each raga, 2500 in numbers. So we find that the people, those who were associated with music, in a way they were trying to write something about them. They were also trying to bring about certain kinds of theories which were related to music, and they were also trying to position them within the way all these musical traditions they grew, they developed. And so that is how we find that how these kinds of musical traditions, they took some kind of a leap because of such people, those who were associated with these musical traditions. And we also find that when you talk about the classical music, it was some kind of a close preserve of the ustads of those times, and a subject of admiration for only a few. And it was to be appreciated by the educated class as well. And theatrical arts, they were also in a way rejuvenated in the new scenario. So in that sense, when you talk about the kind of period which was there during the times of the British, and how during the colonial period we also find that there was a wide popularity of music as well, and there was some kind of a mass awakening during this time, which is referred to as the modern India. And due to the efforts of the Western and Indian musical scholars, music has regained its pride of place in the Indian society as it had enjoyed earlier on. So we find that when such kinds of developments they were happening during this time, and how people from respectable families, they also entered in the field of music, and even women, they started to learn it, and how radio and television, the two mass media mediums in that sense, they widely popularized the Indian musical arts even in the remotest areas. And the role of the films is also considerable in this respect, that how the film music also became very popular this time. And many musical societies, they have been founded in the cosmopolitan cities which are dedicated to the cause of music. So we find that not only individuals, those who were learning the music, or the people, those who were the professionals, those who were teaching the music, and apart from them the scholars, those who were studying the music, we also find that some people, they also formed certain societies in cosmopolitan cities, and how they were also in a way contributing to the cause of music in their own way by indulging in them, and at the same time patronizing the people, those who were engaged in such kind of traditions. And when you talk about radio and television, those which are the mass media, and how both of them, they also played an important role in the sense that the musical arts, they were being taken to widest areas possible because of the reach of such mass media channels. And we also find that how some of the rare musical treatises, they were being published in other languages, and this also made possible that these treatises would be read by the people, those who are learning these kinds of those who were aware of these languages. And we also find that the branch of ethnomusicology also developed to explore the domain of music, which is not confined to one region or one style. So such kind of developments, they were also happening in the context of the branch of music, which could be seen in the context of the ethnomusicology. And we also find that such kind of publishing also in a way helped in the spread of these kinds of texts which were not being read by the people earlier. And many of the universities, whether the Indian or the foreign universities, they were also organizing the conferences on the different aspects of ethnomusicology, where we find that the music scholars and the practitioners, those who are there of the various instruments, vocalists and dancers, they were also participating in these kinds of conferences. And we find that public demand was there for the inclusion of music in the educational system, and it also had some kind of success, that we find that departments of music, they were being established in some of the important universities of the center as well as the states. And we also find that some of the states, they were also providing a lot of patronage to their own local and indigenous musical traditions by establishing certain institutions which were dedicated to promotion of such kind of traditions. And we also find that over a period of time, the Western instruments, they were also being used in the Hindustani music. And when you talk about such instruments such as violin, harmonium, guitar, mandolin and clarinet, they are also used extensively in the Hindustani classical musical performances as well. And we find that how harmonium became very popular as an accompaniment with the Thumri and Khayal during the early 18th century, and it has produced very famous artists like Bhaiya Ganpat Rao. And the modern orchestration and choral group singing is purely an adaptation of West. So we find that when you talk about the kind of orchestra which is being used, and when you are singing in a choir group, then they were also being in a way being adapted from the Western world, where such kinds of things they were being used in earlier times, and how Indian musical traditions also adapted to them over a period of time as well. And we also find that when you're talking about performing instruments in the form of an orchestra, they also existed in the Indian tradition and known as vrind, but its development in the shape of the modern technique in orchestration is influenced by the West. So this trait is more pronounced in Indian light music, especially the film music. It has a large number of Western instruments in ensemble. So we find that how over a period of time some kind of developments in the Indian music they took place, and we also find that the Indian artists they kept on visiting West from time to time, but West never became crazy about the Indian music as we find in the later times. And this kind of system, or this kind of a credit should go to people like Ravi Shankar, Dagar brothers, Ustad Zakir Hussain, Ustad Amjad Ali Khan, Ustad Bismillah Khan, and many others, Pandit Shiv Kumar Sharma, etc. And how these people they have made Westerners to understand music in an Indian way. So the kind of contribution which was made by the Indians, in that sense, that how they learnt, they tried to make the Westerners understand about the Indian musical traditions, and how these people they became popular in the West, because of which Indian musical traditions they also became popular in the West. And we also find that apart from singers, the people those who are associated with dance, reputed dancers like Birju Maharaj, Sonal Mansingh and many others, they have also popularized Indian classical dances all over the world. So in that sense we find that how even the dances they are not beyond the music, musical traditions they are being used in dances, and dances they only become alive when they are in a way accompanied by music. So in that sense also how they share some kind of the dances they share, or they have some kind of a dependence on music as well. And we find that the present day music culture seems to be the commercial in nature and mechanical as well, because it has confined itself within the barriers of the self-interest. Yet one should also accept the fact that it is really becoming global as well, because of the developments which have been taking place in the technology. And when these kinds of changes which are taking place in technology, then they are providing some kind of a thrust in that sense, in the sense that how musical traditions they are getting developed. Then we also find that not only in the context of the developments which are happening in the northern India, but at the same time the kind of changes which have taken place in South India as well. And the great classics of the Sangam age, they make a favorite theme of music. And when you talk about the text, then Silappadikaran, it gives a comprehensive picture as well, that how the evolution of Pan or Raga, their 11 characteristics and the keynotes for different Pans, and the exercises on 3 primary scales, 12 divisions of octave in 12 rasis are all talked about in this text according to Tamil musicologists. So the South Indian music in that sense also got some kind of a thrust with these kinds of texts which emerged, and how these texts they also became popular from the point of view of providing some kind of an information about the indigenous society. And when you see that the inscriptions, they have also played an important role in terms of providing us information about the musical traditions. And one of the inscriptions found at Kudumiya La Malai is of the primary interest, and how Mahendravarman I, who was the Pallava king, is the reportedly author of this inscription, and how Mahendravarman's craze for the music and his taste for Nityam, Talam and Layam are borne out by the characters in Mat Vilas Prahasan, which was written by him. So we find that not only people, those who were concerned with music in a direct manner, but even those who were the elite, for example, king, as we talked about Mahendravarman I, who was a king. So he also had that kind of a taste for music, and he was also in a way contributing in that sense to the development of music as well. So when you talk about the music which is being referred to in the inscription is belong to the sphere Abhyasagana, which is the technical exercise for the developing the finger technique in veena play. So we find that how music basically was evolving over a period of time, and how such kinds of information which are being given in the historical sources, they also provide us a lot of information with regard to the developments in the music. And we also find that such kind of developments were also very, very important from the point of view of the societal developments as well. And we also see, when you talk about the kind of changes which were happening in the society, when you talk about the name of the veena, it was the Parivadini, and a 7-stringed veena it was. And when the inscription was carved, probably the bifurcation of the two systems, Hindustani and Carnatic, had not come into existence at that point of time. And an inscription belonging to 750 AD, which is Navdeep Varma Pallava III, it states that the people, those who were singing the praise of God, Tirupatigam, they had become part of the temple ritual in the first half of the 8th century AD. So we find that how that the people, those who were associated with the singing of the praise of God, and how they were very closely associated with the part of the temple rituals in the first half of the 8th century AD. So in that context, when you talk about the kind of developments which have taken place in terms of the evolution, we find that music has evolved over a period of time, and how such kind of changes which came from ancient to medieval and to modern times, they have been in a way communicated in the earlier lectures. And we today also talked about the changes during the colonial period, and also the kind of evolution of the music in the framework of South India. So we'll continue further talking about these kinds of developments in our next lecture. Thank you very much.